Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have my first layout that I made using the September My Creative Scrapbook Limited Edition kit. In the September kit, we received a 49 and Market collection that was very summer and tropical themed. I just love the colors in this collection. And I had this photo of my younger daughter, Julia, and her boyfriend in Florida. And I thought that this would be a great photo to use for this layout. I started off with some journaling cards. If you've been with me for a while, you know that I don't like to waste any pattern paper. So I cut the cards into L's since you're only going to see the edge of the paper. I used a Tim Holtz distress tool to roughen up the edges a little bit. And then I added some of this green card as well. I put some in the upper right-hand corner, and then I used the remaining piece in the lower left-hand corner. This summer, I spent a lot of time in my scrapbooking room organizing. I did some purging, and then I rethought some aspects of my room, tried to make things a little bit more accessible. In the process, I rediscovered this distress tool. I've had it for quite a few years, and it works so well, and it's better to use this than to dull the blades of my scissors, so I'm going to try to keep this handy. Unfortunately, though, I forget about it very quickly and I go back to using my scissors. I just need a little bit of time to remember that I have this distressing tool. There was an orange ticket in the ephemera pack, so I cut it in half and I added a little bit to the top and a little bit to the bottom. And then I forgot all about my distress tool and I used my scissors to roughen up the edges. I also bend them a little bit. I think that that really adds a lot to the distressing. Now I'm going to start working with my background paper. There's this beautiful sunburst paper that I was very excited to use. Right now I'm using a ruler and a pencil because I want to define the lines of the sunburst because I'm going to be stitching along them. And I like the way the lines are not super clearly defined. I think that really adds a nice look to the sunburst, but for my purposes, I need to have a straight line so that my stitching, which I'm going to add in a little while, will be straight. Whenever I stitch on my pages, I use this Amy Tangerine paper piercing tool that I got a long time ago, and there's a little mat too. The mat is kind of beaten up from using it so many times over the years, but the tool and the mat still work really well. And right now I am poking some holes all along those pencil lines. I'm going to make some of the stitch lines long, some of them short. I want to vary the length so that the sunburst will look interesting. There's a lot of yellow on this piece of pattern paper, so I thought that I would bring in some different colors. I used thread that was turquoise, green, and orange to stitch all of those lines. Now I'm adding some fun foam to the back of my photo to give it a little bit of dimension. After I attach that down, I used my ATG gun and I put some adhesive on the back of the foam. Later on, I will go back and use some wet glue to hold the photo down permanently, but right now I'm not sure exactly where I want to put the photo, so I like that option of being able to move it around. I knew I wanted to put a cluster on the right-hand side of the photo. I thought I would balance that by putting another smaller cluster in the upper left-hand corner. I'm using some of the beautiful, colorful flowers that were in this month's kit. There were yellow flowers, blue flowers, and a pretty reddish purple flower, and I use all of those in both of the clusters. There were a number of banners. I thought this one was cute. It says Beach Day. I liked the color of it and I like the shape of it. So I thought that I would include that underneath the photo. There was also a title that said Sunkissed Memories. I thought that that was a great title for this layout and I like the way that was also blue. So I have some blue above and below the photo. There were a number of really colorful butterflies in the collection, so I include a couple of butterflies on the page. And then in the large cluster, there were some very tiny buds attached to the roses at the bottom of the cluster. and I was trying to arrange the flowers so that you'd be able to see those buds. One of the butterflies had a white border, and I decided to fussy cut that border off because the rest of the butterflies didn't have a border, and I wanted this butterfly to match with the rest of the butterflies on the page. I really don't mind when ephemera has white borders because you could always cut it off, but it's a little bit harder to add it, although I do sometimes add it to die cut pieces. All of the butterflies on the page have a dark edge. I thought that I would make it even a little bit darker to help the butterflies to contrast with the background, and I'm doing that by adding some distress ink in black soot. Now that I'm happy with the clusters, I begin to attach them down to the page, trying to keep everything in the same spot that I had it in. I'm using some heavy gel matte medium to attach all of the elements down to the page. And as I was attaching the flowers down, I realized that those little buds I was talking about earlier were going to get covered up, so I decided that I would cut them off and then reposition them. I tucked a leaf onto the right side of the cluster to balance it out, and then I started to add those buds back in. I originally put them all together, and then I later decided that I would put two in one area and move another one to another spot in the cluster. Those buds are very tiny. It's amazing how something that small can really add so much to a cluster like this. And there was something about these buds that I loved. They are very delicate and nicely made, so I wanted to position them to make the most out of them. So now I have everything in the large cluster attached down, and I move to the smaller cluster at the top of the page. I try to make sure that I know where I want everything positioned before I start attaching it down, but of course I always like to try things in different places, and I decided that I wanted to move the leaves up a little bit, and I'm glad that I decided it when I did because I did it before the gel medium started to dry. I went back to the other cluster because I wanted to add a little banner. This banner says "Livin' the Good Life," and I like the way it looked tucked between the blue and the yellow flower. Now I'm using some ATG adhesive to attach the banner down at the bottom. I just love that S shape that the banner has. I think it adds a lot of movement to the page. Next, I started to attach those butterflies down. Before I did that, though, I added a little bit of foam to the back of them so that their wings would pop up a little bit. I didn't add any foam to the wings of the butterfly that's in the large cluster, the blue butterfly, because it's resting on top of the elements in the cluster. And then I began to move some of the butterflies around a little bit. I am moving the orange butterfly to the title, and then I have the small blue butterfly in the cluster at the top. Now I'm happy with the placement of the butterflies. I think this is a little bit more balanced. There were more tiny yellow flowers that were in one of the flower packs, and I thought that they would look nice in the smaller cluster. Because I added a number in the smaller cluster, I decided that I should add a couple in the larger cluster as well. The small cluster really needed something tiny in it. All of the elements in it are around the same size, and I always like to have different sizes of embellishments in clusters. I'm using some of the gel medium to attach those tiny flowers down to the page. For me, I think it's a good idea to attach little embellishments like this down as soon as I add them to the page so I don't forget to do it. I have some heavy gesso and a bristle brush, and I'm adding some touches of the gesso to the flowers and some of the leaves. This will add some highlights to some of the areas in the clusters. And it also helps to bring all of the areas of the clusters together and make them look like they're one unit. In addition to adding the white gesso to the flowers and the leaves, I also add little touches of it to the butterflies. Again, this helps to tie everything together. I try not to be too heavy-handed with the gesso. I try to just add little touches. I could always go back and add more later, but it's more difficult to remove it. So I put little touches or little dabs of the gesso on a little bit at a time. I wanted to add some finishing touches to the banner. At first, I was thinking I could add jewels in between each little section of the banner, but then I decided that would be a little bit too much. I ended up adding just 4 jewels, one on each side of both of the words, and I think that that was just the right amount. I didn't want to overdo it. Now I'm taking those same jewels that I used on the banner and I'm adding them to the clusters. These are Angel's Craft stone stickers. They have a nice amount of shine to them. They come in strips and I use my scissors and I cut them into individual pieces. I like these jewels because they're very small and they have a lot of shine to them, and they also have a nice strong adhesive on them, so I don't have to reinforce them with extra glue. Earlier, I added a green tab to the left-hand side of the photo. I used my date stamp and I added the date to that tab. And now I'm adding some opal glitter medium just to the butterflies. I wanted to add a little something extra to them to give them a little bit of shine and emphasize them a little bit. So I'm brushing it on. I add more than one coat to each butterfly just to make sure that I have them covered well. And then I switched out a yellow and green butterfly I had on the bottom for this tiny orange butterfly. I think that this goes better with the rest of the butterflies on the page. And just like the other butterflies on the page, I pop up the wings on some foam. And then once I have it positioned the way I want it, I add some of the opal glitter medium to this butterfly as well. Next, I thought I would add just a couple of pearls to the layout. I'm not going to add a ton of them. I'm just adding some half pearls to some of the flowers that are on the layout. I add some pearls to some of the flowers in both of the clusters, and I use 2 different size pearls. I always like to have that variety of sizes of whatever I use on the layout. I use a piece of acetate to protect my photo, and then I added some splatters. I'm using some watered down white acrylic paint and adding some splatters all around the layout, mainly in the areas where I have the clusters, but around other areas of the layout as well. I got a few too many splatters on the banner that says "Living the Good Life." I was afraid with too many splatters you wouldn't be able to read what it said, so I just quickly wiped some of the paint splatters away. I often find that that's effective. However, you have to be careful doing that because you could end up smearing some other things on the page, but it did work out in this case. I rotated the layout to make sure that I got splatters in a lot of different areas, and I was thinking that the layout was complete, but as I looked at the layout over the next few days, it dawned on me that it would look even better if I added some sequins. I don't want to add really colorful sequins because there's a lot going on this page already, so I decided to use these clear sequins. These aren't fancy sequins, they're all the same size, but I thought that that little bit of extra shine that the sequins would add would be a nice touch to the sunburst. And I'm using glossy accents to glue those sequins down to the page. Once again, I was thinking that the layout was complete once I added the sequins, but then a couple of days later, I decided that I really needed to add some white leaves, something white into those clusters, and I thought that die cut branches would be perfect for that. I used a die that was in my stash, some white cardstock, and then I cut the branches out and I embossed them with some sparkly embossing powder, and then I added several to each of the clusters. Not a lot. I think I added 5 to the larger cluster and 3 to the smaller cluster, but I think that this was the finishing touch that the layout needed. Once I had placed each of the branches, I used some gel glue and I glued them in place. And that is the very last touch that I add to the layout. And this layout is finally complete. And here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I really had fun making this layout. I love all these bright summery colors. In the description box, you'll find a link to the My Creative Scrapbook website where you could check out all of the beautiful kits and order a subscription there if you're interested. I would also recommend checking out the My Creative Scrapbook Instagram account. There are so many beautiful layouts that are posted regularly. I get so much inspiration there. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.